Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to your homework for week 2, which is prep for week 3, when we're going to be starting to get into how do you take all this information that you've learned about your brain so far and put it into practice to overcome your anxiety so you can do exactly what you want to do and accomplish the things that you want to accomplish. So we're going to just jump in and get started. So today, really quickly, I'm just going to recap what we talked about this week, which were the parts of our brains that are involved in our anxiety. So we talked about the hippocampus here, which is the part of the brain that is really involved in memory. And when you are sitting down to either do writing or reading or some math or anything that happens to make you anxious, your hippocampus is flipping through kind of a deck of cards or a pile of pictures or however you want to think about it, but it's comparing the thing that it's seeing, whether it's a writing prompt or a math problem or a reading passage, comparing that to anything in the past that you've had experience with that looks remotely like it, and deciding what is this thing, what is its feeling tone that we talked about. Is it something that I need to be worried about and might be scary? Is it something that's pleasant and nice, or is it something that is neutral, doesn't really matter, doesn't really have an impact? If it's something that it recognizes that you've responded to with anxiety before, it tells the amygdala to sound the alarm. The amygdala is then going to blast the alarm in your brain. It's going to make sure that your anxiety response kicks in. You might get a little sweaty, your hands might get cold, your heart might start to beat faster. You know exactly what your anxiety response looks like, but that's what's getting you into fight, flight, or freeze, which is going to make it then really hard to actually do the assignment. So we all know what that feels like. And then we talked about our prefrontal cortex, this prefrontal, like super foremost front part of our brain that is where all of our reasoning happens in our brain. And so you can imagine the reasoning part of our brain might be able to be the part that says, actually, this isn't as big of a deal as amygdala and hippocampus you're making it out to be. I don't need to run away. It's not something that's going to physically harm me. I don't need to get ready to hide or scream or anything like that. So we can all just calm down and do the work. That's your prefrontal cortex. This part kind of gets drowned out when the amygdala and the hippocampus are going so crazy. So what does it mean to overcome anxiety? It really just means that your prefrontal cortex is able to say, like, hey, I have some thoughts I'd like to share on this thing that we're encountering right now. And your amygdala and hippocampus are able to kind of get out of the way and say, okay, go ahead, prefrontal cortex, what do you have to say about this? And then your prefrontal cortex can kick in and say, this is a math problem. Maybe we don't know how to do it right away when we look at it, but we have lots of resources to figure it out. This is a writing prompt. Maybe I don't have a perfectly written essay just ready in this part of the brain to just type out, but there's a process we can go through. This is just a reading passage. Maybe it feels like it's really long or it's going to be boring or anything like that, but it's not dangerous. We don't need to freak out about it. And then you can actually get into doing the assignment. So that's what it means for your brain, like the brain activity that's actually going on when we're talking about overcoming anxiety. And there are a couple of things, a couple of parts to actually overcoming this anxiety that we're going to talk about. First one is taking in the good, and the second one is cooling the fires. Today, we're going to focus really on taking in the good. Next week, we'll focus on cooling the fires. So what does this mean, taking in the good? I'm going to read this passage. You can either read along silently with me, read along out loud with me, or just listen as I read the passage. At the end of the passage, I'll explain a little bit about what it says, and then we'll keep going. So this passage is about the bias of memory. Bias is something we've actually talked about a little bit during the first week of class, the very first lecture that I gave, where I was talking about how your brain tends to do certain things. So I showed you those dashed little segments of line that were arranged around each other. Our brain immediately looks at that and says, that's a circle. That's our tendency for our brain to make a certain decision or go a certain way. That's sort of like a bias. So now we're going to talk about the bias of memory and how memory tends to work. Okay, here I go. So much as your body is built from the foods you eat, your mind or your brain, let's make sure you can see that. Can I make this any smaller? No, that's okay. You can still see me. I'll move it back when I'm done. All right, so much as your body is built from the foods you eat, your mind is built from the experiences you have. As you have more and more experiences, those experiences slowly shape the way your brain works and the way you think and act. They create explicit memories, such as what you did last summer or how it feels when you're doing your favorite activity. They also create implicit memories, such as your expectations of how people act in certain environments and your general outlook on the world. Your implicit memory establishes what it feels like to be you. Okay, so pausing here at the end of this passage, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the vocabulary and concepts that are in it. So, two types of memory that we have are explicit memories and implicit memories. Explicit memories is the types of memories that we usually talk about when remembering something. It's things that you can picture in your mind, kind of remember the sounds you heard, remember the tastes you tasted, remember the smells you smelled, such as if I asked you what you did last summer and you told me, oh, my favorite thing that I did last summer was going to a lake, and you can tell me about who was at the lake and what the water felt like, and you can remember how sunny it was and how it sounded. All of those are explicit memories. And then you can remember how you felt. It was my favorite part because I felt so happy. I was laughing so much. It was warm. Anything like that. That's also part of explicit memory. We're going to focus when we talk about anxiety and overcoming anxiety on implicit memories. Implicit memories are things that you really don't think about at all, such as your expectations of how people act in certain environments. For example, the grocery store. When you go to the grocery store, you don't necessarily sit there and remember last time I went to the grocery store, people were walking carefully with their carts and putting food and other items in their carts that they wanted to get. Nobody was sort of running around dancing. So I know generally people are probably going to be acting like that, and I shouldn't, run around and yell at people or push people or anything like that. You don't have to go through any of that. That's part of your implicit memory. You just know what you're supposed to do and how people act when they're in the grocery store. It says here, it's your general outlook on the world. Your implicit memory is what it feels like to be you. So every day you wake up, you have a life, you have your house that you live in, you have your things that you need to do, you have the way that you feel in general as you walk around and move through the world. That is all based on your implicit memory. It's what it feels like to be you. That's really important because of this next part that I'm going to read. So I'm going to read this next passage again just the same way that I did the first one. Follow along the way that you did before, and then I'll talk about it at the end. So now we're really getting into the bias of memory. So implicit memories can be sorted into two piles, beneficial and harmful. To be happy and calm, we work to create, preserve, and increase positive implicit memories that benefit us and others. We can also work to prevent, eliminate, or decrease negative implicit memories that harm. But the problem is that in order to protect us, our brains naturally pay more attention to unpleasant experiences. So the pile of negative implicit memories grows faster. The solution is to purposefully cherish positive experiences. Okay, so this is really what it means to have a bias of memory. Our memory is biased toward or tends to focus mostly on things that are negative, on things that scared us, on things that hurt us, focus on things that were bad or unpleasant. And then that becomes more part of our memory than anything positive that's happened. The reason for that is because kind of the same reason for your anxiety, it's trying to help you. Your brain is trying to keep you safe, and in order to do that, it needs to be able to quickly recognize when something is dangerous. And the best way to quickly recognize when something is dangerous is to be able to recognize it or remember the things that are dangerous. So that's why our memory has this bias toward negativity. It's trying to protect us. Great when we have to be really vigilant for things that are dangerous. Less great when we kind of don't, when we live in a house instead of outside with the wild animals, when we have protective parents who make sure that our environment is safe around us. Our brain doesn't need to be focused that much on negative stuff in order to keep us safe anymore, but it doesn't know that. Our brain is built to keep us safe, and this is the way that it's built to do that. So the consequence of that is when it's not actually necessary, when we don't need to be fighting off wild animals all the time or anything, we still build up these negative implicit memories, and then that anxiety or that tension that would have come from paying attention to scary animals that want to eat us, to needing to find shelter when there's a really bad rainstorm, anything like that, all that focus is now put onto things like writing, onto things like reading, and onto things like math. So it's really something that we can't do anything about. You can't change your brain's negativity bias. Again, you wouldn't want to. It's there to help you. But we need to be able to counterbalance that because we don't want to spend our whole lives just focused on negative things and feeling anxious about the math, the reading, or the writing that has gotten so closely associated in our brains with being really scary, with being something that needs to produce anxiety. So in order to do that, what do? The last sentence says the solution to this bias is to purposefully cherish positive experiences. So that means that our brains are already really good at focusing on negative experiences and remembering those. We don't have to do anything about that. What we need to give it a little boost for is remembering positive things, is trying to balance out that bias toward negative memories. So we cherish positive experiences. We take the time to make sure that we actually have good experiences with the things that are causing anxiety that we actually want to get better at and be able to do without the anxiety. We take the time to really cherish the positive experiences, slow down, think about how great they were, and let them sink into our memory. And we can also take our negative memories and actually make them more positive, which is something that I'll talk to you about more in class, and we can practice with and actually do that. But really it's about recognizing that our brain has this bias and then deciding I can do something about this. I can help balance this bias out by taking the time and putting in the energy to really think about the positive things. Really think about the positive experiences that I've had and integrate those into my memory. And if you can't think of a single positive experience writing, reading, or doing math, that's why you're in this class. We're going to give you positive experiences and then really make sure that we integrate those. And then as we're moving forward, I'll give you some tools to help you do that in the future also when you're no longer in the class. So that is why memory and taking in the good are really important. The bottom line is, when it comes down to it, your anxiety is not about the ink on the page. Your anxiety is not about the words that are written on the page that are telling you what writing assignment you need to do, or are not about the words on the page in the reading passage that you have to read. And it's not about the actual math problem on the page, really, that you have to complete. Your anxiety is about the landscape that's in your brain and body. It's about those implicit memories that you have about the reading, the writing, and the math. It's about the implicit ways that you don't even think about, that you probably don't even know about because they're implicit, they're under the surface, where your hippocampus and other parts of your brain have put together the idea of reading for school and something that's really stressful. Maybe something like not getting a particular reward that you want. It's putting together the idea of writing and ideas about how good you are as a student in general. It's putting together ideas about math and whether you're going to get a good job when you're older. It's putting together all these ideas and you don't even realize it because of this is all this implicit memory that's buried in your brain that you don't really have access to, you don't get to think about, but it's there and it's governing how you feel every day. So your anxiety isn't necessarily about the thing that's triggering your anxiety in the moment. It's about that landscape that is in your brain. And so that's really important because you can't change the schoolwork. You can't do anything to change that. But that doesn't even matter. You don't need to. What you need to do is change your brain and body's landscape, and that you can do. You can always change the landscape of your brain and the landscape of your body by, first thing we're talking about, in this case, taking in the good, cherishing positive experiences. This might sound completely crazy and sound like it's not going to work, but when we get into the specific tools and the specific things that you can do, I think it'll start to make a little bit more sense and you'll start to see how it can really work. So, taking in the good, what we're going to talk about this in your homework this week and in class next week, in week 3, is taking in the good is like landscaping your brain. Think about landscaping your yard, you prune the bushes, you mow the lawn, or your parents mow the lawn, and it looks nicer. It's a lot more calm and doesn't look all sort of like tangled and messy. This is very similar. Taking in the good is like landscaping your brain so that your prefrontal cortex, when you're having an anxiety response, can tell your amygdala and your hippocampus, hey, I've got some thoughts. This isn't as bad as you think it's going to be. And your amygdala and hippocampus can sort of say, okay, go ahead. What do you have to say? And then you actually have a chance to attempt the assignment in a way that feels a lot better and in a way that feels a lot more like you can do it, and you can actually have more access to your skills that you need in order to do that assignment. So that's what we're going to be focusing on this week. You have a little reflection assignment in your journal, so please, when this video ends, go ahead and go to the next page in your journal and complete that assignment, and I will see you next week. Thanks.